we had a very saturated day with two previous saturated sessions on Azerbaijan and on Moldova. We made a big overview of the gender equality situation as well as the situation preceding the adoption of the Istanbul Convention of Moldova. And there were quite a lot of questions and discussions. So we are looking forward to the third very interesting session to be made by Mrs. Rosalyn Park. She's our international expert, and I believe her session will be really very interesting because she will be touching the issues which are concerning each of us. And this is the overview of the backlash to human rights. And I'm personally looking forward to hear you, Mr. Rosalyn. The floor is yours.
Spasiba, thank you so much. It is an honor, as always, to work with each and every one of you and to present with you. And before I begin, I just want to thank the Gender Network platform, the Civil Society Forum, Shala, for your beautiful introduction, and of course, our very dear friends at Center Women's Perspectives, Marta and Helena. It always makes me so happy to work with all of you. Tanya, I want to just double check, are you doing simultaneous interpretation or should I stop every few sentences?
I'm doing simultaneous, but I would be grateful if you were slower. Also, people, please switch off the microphones, everybody who is not the speaker and who is not the interpreter, because too much noise and I can't hear what Rosalyn is saying.
Tanya, yeah. Are you able to speak on the microphone so I know what you're
saying?
Can
you hear me now? Can you hear me now, Rosalyn?
Marta, maybe you can tell me how the interpretation will be working.
Rosalind, can you hear me now?
Everything is okay with interpretation, Rosalind. You can start. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, great. So I am going to go ahead and start to share my screen. And I will speak more slowly. Tanya, just flag me if you need me to slow down or stop between sentences. Before I begin, I just want to say I hope this will be interactive. I know it's the end of the day for you and it's a very heavy topic. So I'm encouraging all of you to put answers and conversations in the chat. My friend Elena, do you want to give a wave? Sasha is her daughter's name. Elena can read Russian and is from Belarus and will interpret whatever you write in the chat. So you can write in Russian and she'll read it out loud in English to me. So let's go ahead and get started. I will start to share my screen. Let's see. Hang on one moment. Okay. Can everyone see the PowerPoint? All good? Yep. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and get started then. So many of you may be wondering why the Advocates for Human Rights, which is a US organization, is working on this backlash. Not to look back at the 4 years that we've also had in our own country with our own president. This was also driven by our partners in other countries. We began to hear from our partners about the different challenges they were facing with regard to laws that were rolling back human rights, funding that was shrinking, difficulties in doing their work. And we realized this was not just isolated incidents. This was part of a bigger connected pattern. So we started to undertake research. So we are approaching the backlash in a few ways, and I want to share this with you in case it's helpful to you and there's any sort of support or assistance we can also provide to you in your work as we both work to counter this backlash. We carry out monitoring and documentation where we do research and fact-finding to uncover violations and make recommendations to fix them. We also do trainings of both systems actors like police, judges and prosecutors, but also civil society to build capacity and build skills training. And finally, we do a great deal of advocacy before the UN. Our partners at Center Women's Perspectives have partnered with us many times on this, where we bring human rights issues to the UN to make recommendations. Right now, we are working on a backlash to the Istanbul Convention report. And we are in the editing phase. It's about 150 pages, a little long, but I invite any of you, if you want to contact me for a confidential interview, we would love to get more information from all of you about what you are seeing in each of your countries on the backlash to the Istanbul Convention. So this is an agenda of what we'll be talking about today. And I'll read it out loud in English for those of you, so you know what it says in Russian. First, we'll talk about the opposition actors. Second, what issues they oppose. Third, how they go about opposing our human rights issues. Fourth, red flags that you should be on the watch out for. And fifth, we're going to end with the more skills building training on messaging, because that is probably one of the things that the radical right does the very best. They're very good at messaging. And that is also a need that's been expressed by our own partners that they need more capacity building on. So let's go ahead and get started. To clarify, as I'm talking through this training, I'm going to refer to the radical right, those groups, as the opposition. It's just easier to call them that. The opposition is not defined by any specific actor. It involves governments. It involves NGOs. It involves gongos, those government organized NGOs. And it involves some religious groups, including the Catholic and the Orthodox Church. On top of that, it's also emboldened private actors to threaten and harm women, to harm LGBTI individuals and human rights defenders. So I invite you all now to go into your chat and add to your chat any other organizations or actors you know of, whether in your country or internationally, who are part of this opposition. So what I've listed here is just a sample of the opposition actors working to roll back human rights. Again, I'll read them while you guys are putting in the chat what you also are seeing. We have the World Congress of Families, the Alliance for Defending Freedom, Agenda Europe, Ordo Juris in Poland, Citizen Go in Spain, United Families International, it's a US-based one, In the Name of the Family, which is Croatia, All Together in Ukraine. I think you all know of that. Has anyone added anything to the chat? It looks like so. Elena, can I turn it over to you to share if there's anything, any other opposition actors people had shared?
I don't see anything yet.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll keep going. So this is not definitive. I know there's a lot more opposition actors, but you can see some of the biggest players here. So let's talk about the issues they oppose. This is just a short list of the issues that the opposition opposes. LGBTI rights, women's rights, sexual and reproductive rights, comprehensive sex education, immigrants. And of course, oh, can we get, if somebody can mute their microphone, that'd be great. We're getting a little bit of feedback. And of course, the Istanbul Convention. So we are going to talk about each of these issues in turn, and I would like to make this participatory. So as we go through each issue on each slide, please put in the chat in Russian what you are seeing with regard to that specific issue in your own country. You can write it in Russian. Elena's going to monitor it, and then she'll share what she sees in the chat after each slide. I just ask that you put your country in there along with the description of what you're seeing so we know which country we're talking about. So let's start. This is LGBTI rights. Again, go ahead and write in the chat what your country is and what you're seeing with the backlash to LGBTI rights. It can be anything: bad messaging, bad laws, private actors harming individuals. Just put it in there so we can share during this. Now, the opposition is extremely clear that marriage is between a man and a woman. And there are a number of ways they attack same-sex marriage. But the primary ways that they oppose it is by saying, hey, same-sex marriage is not a traditional family, which we know they define as a married man and woman. We're going to come back to the family because it's very important. Second, they'll say, hey, the purpose of the family is to create and raise children. And we know biologically that a same-sex couple cannot do that. So that's another argument. Third, they'll say that homosexuality goes against their national values and culture. They also bring in the effects on children. And this is very persuasive because children are perceived as so innocent, right? They talk about how same-sex marriage and gay adoption violates children's rights. It robs them of a mother or a father figure. It even constitutes violence against the child. They also use a lot of fear and hysteria to say that a same-sex marriage is going to twist and pervert the younger generation's moral values, and that children will eventually replicate the LGBTI lifestyle as the norm. And as for trans persons, you'll hear a lot of messaging that it's against the will of God. And again, they demonize transgender persons with really sensational claims, but that cause a lot of fear and hysteria, like turning boys into girls, boys dressing as girls. There's a lot of focus on boys dressing and boys turning into girls, not the other way around, but more the other boys into girls. And of course, talking about perverted old men in women's bathrooms. So that's just kind of a snapshot on that. I want to see if anyone has shared anything in the chat and see if there's anything to share.
Yes, Nikolenko Olga, the comment is, she's from Moldova. She says that every year LGBTQ march experiences a really high volume of aggression against people that march, peacefully march during the march.
Nicoleka, thank you for sharing that. And that is a really important point because we're talking about repression of freedom of association and assembly that I assume is carried out by private actors. So here you not only have the government involved in this or else condoning it, but you also have private civilians who are perpetrating abuses. Thank you for sharing that. All right, so let's continue on to women's rights. Again, please share in the chat what your experience is in your country and what you're seeing, and we'll do the same process. So the thing about the opposition is they attack feminists. They hate feminists. So I'm going to quote from the World Congress of Families because it was actually quite ridiculous what they said. At the World Congress of Families, they said, "We respect women," whereas feminists say that those women who decide to stay at home are poor women. Feminists want to use women to achieve their own goals, not protect their own rights. So you can see how the opposition is attacking women's rights activists with these claims. So to them, they don't like gender equality. Why? Because gender equality had big impacts on the family. Now there's a documentary you can watch, it's in English, put up by the opposition called Demographic Winter. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But in this documentary, they say that once we began to travel toward gender equality and all of the other changes that came with it, including birth control, the family changed. So you'll see that the opposition talks a lot about fertility decline, and they will point to the women's revolution as the cause of that. Because women entered the workforce, they became closer to achieving gender equality, and that's when the birth rate went down. So as education for women went up, fertility rates went down. And with college diplomas and education, women chose careers over their traditional family. Opposing women's rights also lets them reinforce traditional roles. And I'm quoting Alan Carlson, who is the founder of World Congress of Families, and listen to how he positions men and women in life. He says a culture of marriage between women and men will encourage young women to grow into wives, homemakers, and mothers. It encourages young men to grow into husbands, home builders, and fathers. So you can see how they're reinforcing this. And we're also seeing a lot of messages that emasculate men who have a role in the home. Real men don't do housework. How many of you guys have heard messages like that in your country? Show of hands. Real men don't do dishes. Real men don't do housework. What they're trying to say is, of course, and I know we've all heard this, is the man should be in the workforce and the woman in the home. And it's really clear that a woman can have a job, but her first position is in the home at the side of her children. And some of you have heard of Agenda Europe, which is a very underground radical right group. And someone was able to get a hold of their manifesto. And their manifesto actually says it's typically necessary for one of the parents, usually the mother, to have no or only a part-time job so that they can raise the children. So you can see that there's definitely a bent toward pushing women back into the home. Okay, let's see. Elena, I want to turn it over to you. Is there anything in the chat about the backlash to women's rights in people's country?
Yes, so there are more examples from Svetlana in Ukraine. She says that there are quite often attacks on the trainings conducted by media on the topics for LGBTQ plus Ukraine. LGBT plus, that's the organization name, right? Then Olga Nikolenko also mentions from Moldova that church considers its own right to interfere in the government policies that are considered women's rights, even though the church is separated from the government.
And I think that's a very good point in that you see the state and the church aligning at some points and forming these alliances. And that is definitely something we're seeing playing out. So I'm very glad you brought that up. Thank you both, Svetlana and Olga, for your comments there. Let's move to the next issue, sexual and reproductive rights. Again, if you're seeing attacks on sexual reproductive rights, abortion, sex education in your country, please share those experiences in the chat. Well, we all know they are against abortion. And we are seeing this play out in Poland, where they've restricted abortions. Now in Poland, the latest constitutional court ruled that abortion is not allowed in cases where the fetus is diagnosed with a serious and irreversible birth defect, which was one of the very few limited exceptions for abortion. Contraception is just as bad as abortion. Artificial contraception is viewed as equal to abortion because contraception is a mentality that says when contraception fails, abortion is okay. So what they want to see people use is more natural methods of contraception that's not artificial. We have a joke here in the United States. I grew up Catholic as well. And what was the joke? It's something like, what do they call Catholic parents who use natural contraception? The answer, parents. So anyway, you can see that they really oppose this and they're advocating for more natural methods. The same goes for sex education. Sex education is also demonized, which I'm going to explain in the next slide. I don't think there's anything in the chat that's new for sexual and reproductive rights, is there? Okay, so let's keep going on. Let's talk about education, because this is one of their main priorities to attack both gender-based education and sex education. So when it comes to gender and sex education, they attack this in a few different ways. The first is about the parents' rights, because gender and sex education carried out by the state, that violates parents' rights. according to the opposition. Parents, not the government, should be the primary educators of their children. They are very firm on that. Because what they say is that any sort of gender education is going to give children liberal ideologies that are going to be different from their parents' religious and moral views. And they also say that any sort of gender education is going to promote disrespect for parents' religious and cultural views. Now, when it comes to gender education, they're doing something very smart here. They are using the word gender to create mass hysteria. And I know this school has talked about gender issues and gender ideology. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. But when we are talking about gender education, what the opposition says is it creates hysteria again. They say, oh, gender education, it's going to teach gender identity and gender neutrality where no one can identify as a man or woman. It's going to teach homosexuality and transsexualism. And we have seen this play out in terms of changing laws in countries. In Romania, they just passed a law this year that bans all education on gender in their schools. And I forgot to add, please again, add to your chat if you're seeing anything with education in your country. The last point I want to make is that comprehensive sex education is hated. And some of the reasons, there's actually a website devoted to stopping sex education, and it lists the harms, the damages from comprehensive sex education. Here's just a few of the things that they've listed. Sex education will teach children to masturbate. It will encourage diverse sexual orientations and gender identities. It's going to promote sexual promiscuity as a child's right. It promotes abortion. It promotes condoms without showing how they fail. And I actually heard this at the World Congress of Families. Because of sex education, your kids are going to get abortions, sexual counseling, testing for HIV, and STI treatment for AIDS. I don't know why testing and treatment for sexually transmitted infections is a problem, but that's how they frame it. So you can see they go all out in attacking this kinds of education. Elena, let me turn it over to you to read the chat.
Yeah, we have few comments. Thank you so much, guys. So one of the biggest reproaches towards feminists, they're being blamed for supporting abortions. So this is a comment from Bogdan Stelmach from Ukraine. Another comment from Anastasia Kirichenko, again from Ukraine, that after a situation in Poland, in social media, there is more and more calls for basically changing the abortion policy in Ukraine as well. And it's just taken a new strength and like a new strong course against it. Matveeva Ludmila from Women Initiative says that even the trainings about phenomenon of the domestic violence is really difficult to conduct in schools for high school children. And she's from Pridnestrovia. That is Russia, right, Ludmila? Or is it Ukraine?
Okay, and I think, was that everything, Elena?
Yes.
Thank you so much, everyone. That's so helpful. Marta,
Moldova. The last comment of Ludmila is from Moldova. Sorry, I'm not so good. Не так уже хорошо с картой разбираюсь. Thank you.
Okay, great. Marta, you had your hand up.
Да, я хотела продемонстрировать у нас.
Yes, I wanted to demonstrate. We have a textbook that's been very well advertised about the basics of family. It's for high schoolers, the last 2 years at high school. And here we made marks where this course is in conflict, either with the law or with human rights or with women's rights. But there are some funny intentions. Here, recommendations. For instance, that if a woman won't be breastfeeding until a certain age, the baby will become very lazy, or that contraception is murder. So many, we flagged these moments that are indeed funny from our point of view, and sometimes they are also contrary to the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. I'm sure you were sharing great examples from Ukraine. And I'll never forget the example that Halina shared with me when her daughter came back from school, and she had a pamphlet, and it was a pregnant woman with daggers pointed toward her pregnant belly. And it was very anti-abortion. And so they're bringing this into the schools as well, with very hysteria messages to spread onto the children. So let's go to another hot topic, and that is immigration. Again, if you're seeing backlash against migrants and immigration in your country, please put it into the chat. These stories you guys are all sharing are so helpful to hear. And it's really, it's so good to know what's going on in the countries and to hear the commonalities. So first of all, the opposition uses national identity to oppose immigrants because immigrants are seen to erode and destroy the country's national values, right? Again, to do this, it uses the family. The opposition pits immigrants against the national identity and the family. And I'm going to quote from the World Congress of Families in Verona. I think this was either the Italian or the Hungarian government. I can't quite remember. But what they said was, we have to have borders. We have to be a nation. And the fight against our nations holding borders is one that strikes at the very heart. What happens when our countries are overrun is that our families are destroyed. Now, in countries where the birth rate is lower and they're not having as many babies, they don't want to solve the birth rate problem with migrants. They want more of their citizens to have babies. So that's why you see policies like Hungary's, where they reward families with more financial incentives every time they have another child. They also use a lot of misinformation to really foster xenophobia and discrimination against migrants. Again, they play to the family and they talk about how immigration damages the traditional family because supposedly immigration results in single parenting and children left without parents. So they're making up misinformation. In addition, and we've seen this play out a lot in the United States, I'm curious if it's also happening in your countries, immigrants are portrayed as violent and bringing domestic violence with them. Viktor Orban in Hungary actually said that Hungary would not ratify the Istanbul Convention because immigrants will make enforcement of that treaty difficult. And according to Orban, this is because the immigrants who are migrating to Europe are violent and do not respect women. So nothing about the Hungarians, it's all about the immigrants who are the problem. And finally, we're seeing issues with gender-based asylum. There have been several challenges to asylum based on gender because of the idea it would force countries to grant asylum based on someone's gender identity or sexual orientation. We just recently had a challenge in the United States. I'm not sure if you had too. Okay, and I don't think that there's anything new in the chat, right? Okay, so let's go on to the last issue that they oppose. And I know you have heard a lot about the Istanbul Convention so far in this school. So I'll just go very quickly on this. They oppose the Istanbul Convention with gender ideology. We're going to talk more about that. We've seen what has happened in Bulgaria and Poland. In Bulgaria, the Constitutional Court said you can't ratify the Istanbul Convention. And in Poland, they ratified it, but now they've announced they are going to withdraw from that treaty. We're also seeing a petition to stop EU accession to this treaty. If you go to stopgenderconvention.org, you will see this petition and all of their arguments laid out. And there is now a proposed convention as an alternative to the Istanbul Convention, the draft convention on the rights of the family. And I will talk more about that later on. All right, so let's move on. Let's move on to the next section about how they oppose human rights. They use a lot of misinformation. Basically, they lie. They spread a lot of myths and they use a lot of hysteria to create fear in people who don't understand what's really happening. Now, the opposition uses a combination. I mentioned fear. They use fear mongering using gender ideology on one hand, but on the other hand, they use this apparent goodwill and benevolence by talking about the family. And we'll talk about that more. They also appropriate human rights language in their own way, and they also exploit people's sense of nationalism. So let's talk about each of these. This is gender ideology, and I want to open it up, and you can speak in Russian. Can anyone on the chat explain what gender ideology is? And I invite anyone, go ahead and raise your hand or unmute your microphone. And I also can't see everybody, so. Any takers? Okay, so let me go ahead and explain. Gender ideology is this concept that gender is a choice and people can choose their own sex, okay? And as I'm talking about gender ideology, I invite you to put things in the chat about what you're seeing and hearing in your country, because I think it's good for us to share, because gender ideology is one of the most powerful arguments and tools by the opposition. So if you're seeing stuff about gender ideology in your country, please put it in the chat. Gender ideology is not something that's new. It was invented by the Vatican back in the 1990s. But it is now, like I said, one of the most powerful tools of the opposition. Gender ideology equates the goals of feminist and LGBTI organizations as attacking traditional social values and that traditional family. So what the opposition has done is it has used gender ideology to fight efforts to legalize same-sex marriage and adoptions by gay couples, and it's used it to attack the Istanbul Convention. And what I want to point out is that with gender ideology, they attack both the women's and the LGBTI movements. So whether you work for LGBTI or women's rights, we are both under the same attack under gender ideology. They also use this ideology to create lots of hysteria and feed on homophobia. Some of the things we've heard is that children will not be able to call their parents mom and dad. They will have to call them it. The boys will dress in skirts, again, coming back to boys turning into girls. Old men will be in bathrooms looking at women, and so on and so on. So you hear this hysteria, this fear mongering they're building up. Let's see, and I don't see anything in the chat yet, so let's keep going. But when it comes to gender ideology, the point that I want to make with this slide is that we need to be more strategic on our messaging. I'm talking about us, the left. They have done a really good job messaging on gender ideology. So it's up to us to take back that messaging. So I'm going to be talking about that more later today. I see Marta posted something in the chat.
Yeah, Marta says that in Ukraine, currently there is a really high level of transphobia and even amongst feminists.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so there's a lot of pushback against trans persons. And I think we're seeing that increase, and there's a lot of division as well. So thank you, Marta, for sharing that. What this had said, I forgot to read this slide. It says assault on the family, erases the male-female binary, gender can be chosen, and it's a tool against women's and LGBTI movements. So let's talk about the family, because just like gender ideology, the family is one of the most powerful tools as well for the opposition. This strategy of using the family is actually very smart, and unfortunately, it's very effective with the general public. Why? Because it appears like it's a goodwill, a benevolent gesture that we care. I mean, when you see happy families with children, who can argue with that? But it's about protecting the family as a natural and a fundamental unit of society. But what we know is that their definition of traditional family is the married man, woman, and children. So how do they promote the family? Well, what they do is they talk about the benefits that a traditional family will bring. So you should expect to hear messages that, oh, a married man and a woman will raise children who are healthier, have a lower risk of abuse, and are more likely to obey the law. Husbands are going to live longer. They're going to be healthier. They're going to get bigger incomes than single men. Wives, well, they're going to be at lower risk of domestic violence. And communities, well, they're going to have lower burdens on healthcare, education, and the criminal justice system when couples are married. So you can see they're spouting out a lot of myths that is very easy for the public to believe. But note, again, the key here is a married man and woman. So what they're going to do on the flip side is they're going to attack any other form of family. Single parents, divorced parents, cohabitating couples who are not married, and of course, same-sex couples. So as much as they use goodwill to promote the family, they use fear tactics to show the consequences that any other family can have. So when it comes to a non-traditional family, you should expect to hear about divorce, serial marriages, and non-marital relationships, that it's going to cost society billions of dollars. It's going to lead to more drinking and driving. There's a greater chance of children becoming criminals. There's a higher risk of teen pregnancy and a higher chance a step-parent will kill their stepchild. Cohabitating couples, they'll experience more domestic violence and less happiness than married couples. And single mothers will have children with more health problems. So I don't know about you, but I'm sure you all know a lot of divorced couples, a lot of single moms and cohabitating couples, and I don't see these problems. And so you can see how they're inflating these myths to cause fear and hysteria again. But the thing is that once you know the misinformation they are using, like what I just described, you can prepare for it. You can counter it with the facts that refute their claims about divorced parents and single moms, because you now know what their arguments are. The other point I want to make about the family is their argument about demographic decline. So what they're basically saying is that we are on the verge of a very painful human extinction because we're not having enough babies. Demographic decline is actually a very effective strategy for the opposition because if you think about it, it's an umbrella and it lets them attack several human rights issues with demographic decline: sexual and reproductive rights, LGBTI rights, immigrant rights, because we don't want migrants to have more babies. We want our own people to have our babies. And of course, women's rights, because of what we talked about with gender equality and women getting jobs and not having as many babies. The third thing that the opposition does very well is they use human rights. They talk in the framework of rights to push their agenda. And I see there's something in the chat. Is there, Elena, should we?
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Olga. Olga from Moldova. She says that the ability of a person to change their gender identity is being laughed upon, and especially men just talking between themselves and they're just laughing at that. Thanks so much, Olga, for sharing.
So it's ridicule. There's a lot of public ridicule and stigma of LGBTI issues. So again, this is going to come back to messaging, what we have to do better. And I'm going to share with you some tools that we used in the United States. And I know I see some repeats here for the Feminist Intensive. So I hope that you'll be able to share your thoughts as well on the messaging, but we'll come back to that. So let's talk about how they talk about rights. First, they use human rights language to make their point. In fact, when you look at Agenda Europe's manifesto, they talk about a strategy of using a framework of rights. But what they do is they create alternative definitions of human rights that align with their own agenda. So take a look at this screenshot you see here from the World Congress of Families. It's about Article 16 on the family of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, when I think of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I think that's ours. That's for us to be able to protect human rights. But we have the opposition using that same document to push forward their own agenda. In addition, they're very sophisticated in how they use rights. There is actually a United Nations negotiating guide put out by United Families International. Somebody went through every single UN instrument, pulled out every piece of language that has to do with the family, human life, parents' rights, religious values, and sovereignty for people to use UN language in pushing their own agenda to assert their rights. So I'll show an example later about how they use human rights language. We're also seeing a lot of talk about men's rights. Be aware that we are seeing a surge in men's rights and fathers' rights in this movement. Can I see a show of hands? How many of you are also hearing a lot of talk in your country about the rights of men, the rights of fathers, the poor men in this country? I see 2 hands from Marta. She's speaking for all of Ukraine. Yeah, so it is a resurgence. Be aware that you are going to hear
Фонд народонаселения ООН проект делает.
We have UN People's Fund doing a project. Yeah, doing a project to make fatherhood merry and pleasant, not thinking about mothers at all. So I'm going crazy about this here.
Elena, do you mind translating that for me?
I just did.
There is a big movement on just bringing the happiness of man and making the man feel great. Nobody thinks about moms. It's just, that's just how it goes. Yeah, here, this is the project.
Таня, якщо можете, перекладіть.
Great. And that is from your organization.
How to make responsible fatherhood popular and happy.
Trying to translate from Ukrainian. I don't know that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
How to make the parenthood for fathers popular and fun.
Oh, all right.
Примерно правильно перевела.
So be aware, we're going to hear a lot about men's rights, fathers' rights, and men are victims too. It's increasing. We're also going to hear about the father's right to see and raise their children. And we all know this is a problem in domestic violence, where men continue to use the children to exert power and control over their victim. And maybe they shouldn't be allowed to see them, or else only see the children under supervised conditions. So how would I counter this situation with the rights? If it was me, I would be prepared to cite to international standards that support women's rights and LGBTI rights. If the opposition is citing to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, look to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Look at their general comments or their concluding observations to find interpretations of that treaty that explain and support your position. I would also cite to evidence and best practice standards. Whenever I hear people say, well, men are victims too, I cite to the research that shows in heterosexual relationships, Men are the primary aggressors in 95% of cases. Whenever women do use violence, they are often using it in self-defense. So be prepared to counter these kinds of rights arguments. Fight fire with fire. Use the human rights standards and use the best practice evidence and research. Okay, great. So let's go to nationalism. Nationalism allows them to push their agenda further. So gender ideology, we talked about that. They're saying all these things like we are our own country. Anything that we don't like is the evil from the West, the evil from the EU. So that's how they approach gender ideology. It's an evil that's coming from the EU and the West to infiltrate your own country. Same with laws. This nationalism gives them a reason to oppose laws they don't like. I think we all remember when the Belarusian president labeled the proposed domestic violence law as Western rubbish. And we also see laws like Russia's foreign agent law that allows governments to demonize NGOs that take foreign money and forces them to put the word spy on all of their materials. To the average public, that creates distrust of something foreign that's spying on their country's national values. We've seen how nationalism has been used to counter the Istanbul Convention because it's portrayed as foreign or an EU kind of treaty. They talk about how Gravio, the monitoring body for the Istanbul Convention, is going to impose on countries' national sovereignty. We're also hearing a lot of talk that, hey, our national laws are good enough for human rights. We don't need any international treaties. And again, it allows them to oppose migration and put immigrants as the cause of the problems. So I'm not going to tell you how to overcome these nationalist sentiments. You're best positioned to do that. But I do want to invite you to share any ideas you have in the chat. And I see we have one from Ludmila.
Yes, Ludmila says that in Moldova, there is no laws against domestic violence. And during the court proceedings, women usually are discriminated against. And technically, to prove any manipulation of men, manipulation of men, of the dads of their children is practically impossible. So psychological experts and like psychologists that are working in different public organizations, they don't want to even look into those cases.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask everyone to mute their microphone if they're not speaking? There's a little bit of feedback.
Psychologists that are working in...
Oh, maybe I can do it. Okay. Great, thank you. And thank you, Ludmila, for sharing that. It's important to know what's going on. Okay. Everyone to mute their microphone if they're not speaking. There's a little bit of feedback.
Psychologists that are working in...
Oh, maybe I can do it. Okay. Great, thank you. And thank you, Ludmila, for sharing that. It's important to know what's going on. So I'm hearing an echo. Is anyone else hearing an echo on Zoom?
Is it live on Facebook somewhere?
Could be. Okay, that seems to fix it. All right. So it's late. I know you guys have been going through many intensive sessions. So I threw in this next slide as a quick 30-second break. I'm gonna let Elena introduce this next slide. Whoops, there we go. This is just to wake you up. Elena, go ahead and introduce Latte.
I'm going to be speaking in Russian. Then there's our new cat. Her name is Coffee Latte. And as everywhere with the pandemic, as you know, there are many new pets. So we got a pet as well. I'm sorry, Sasha is my daughter. And of course, she is the person who loves our new pet the most. And to be honest, this photograph is probably how you want to feel every day, especially when the snow fell.
Thanks, Elena. So we have an official mascot. All right, let's get back to what we're talking about. That was our little break. Let's talk about the strategies that the opposition uses, because they are sophisticated and they have a variety of different tactics they use. Okay, this slide, I'll talk about each of them, says alliances, manipulation of data, messaging. They're so good on messaging. Their international status, lawfare, and alternatives that they propose. So let's talk about alliances. They are very good at building alliances across the differences they have. What they do really well is they collaborate in a network of think tanks, policy groups, activist organizations, litigation groups, and conservative religious bodies. So they are able to build coalitions and overcome differences, whether those differences are national, language, or political. What holds the opposition together is not one central command unit, but rather they're unified by this radical ideology that hates democracy, hates diversity, and feeds off of moral panic and paranoia. Now, on the flip side, what the opposition tries to do is they try to sow division among their enemies. That's us. And it is one of actually Agenda Europe's strategies to malign their opponents and to seed distrust among the public. So let's take a look at this short exercise I want to do. I think you all have seen the one on the right. This is Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again." Now on the left, this is a yard sign that you see throughout the United States. People put them up in front of their houses to express their support for a certain issue. It's a human rights sign, and I'll read for you what it says in English so you know. The sign on the left says, "We believe Black Lives Matter. No human is illegal. Love is love. Women's rights are human rights. Science is real. Water is life. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Okay, that's what the sign on the left says. I want to open it up to all of you with a question. What do you think is the biggest difference between these two symbols? What strikes you as the biggest difference? Any takers? All right, or put your ideas in the chat as well. You can throw your ideas about what you think is different between these two symbols in the chat. I'll tell you what strikes me. And this was actually raised to me by a Swiss person who had come to the United States and saw this herself. I didn't see this until she pointed it out. When you look at the symbol on the right, Trump's hat, the people who will wear that hat are the people who are pro-life, the people who carry their guns, the people who hate immigrants, and the people who deny climate change is happening. They all stand for very different issues that have nothing to do with each other, but yet they can unify under one common slogan. Okay, look at the sign on the left. We can barely fit the words on the sign. Like, we can't seem to find a common slogan or a common ground to unify under human rights. And to me, that was interesting. All of these things on the human rights sign are so important. They're all important, but yet we couldn't find that common ground to unify like the opposition can. I see a lot of things coming in the chat, so I'm going to turn it over to Elena to read some of these.
Yes, I agree with you guys. It is, so Bogdana says, yeah, it's a lot of letters, a lot of messages on the left, right? And the right sign is pretty clear and it's just one message. Paula Gamba says, yeah, first one on the left is more inclusive and engaging. Marta, lots of text on the left, and it's just crowded, right? Yeah. Olga Nikolenko, the difference is what we believe and the actions. Anastasia Kirichenko, it's red. It's a really clear message. And these people there don't talk about the AI, right? The artificial intelligence. They don't believe in that. Olga Nikolenko, somebody believes, puts the faith and the law and the rights on the first place, and some put it into the actions.
Great. Thank you. These are all really good points. And I especially like the point that it's very simple, it's bright, it's eye-catching. And you see in 1 second what the red hat is saying. When I'm in my car and I'm driving past the left sign, I actually have to stop to read it. I can't see it fast enough because there's too many words, like you just said. So it's an interesting thing to think about. We need that inclusivity, but we also need to become better messengers that can reach people more quickly and simply. So let's talk about another one of their strategies and how they manipulate data. I'm just going to highlight a few top strategies. Be aware that they are going to twist data. They're going to cite to very important sounding think tanks and organizations like the Heritage Foundation. Now, I mentioned that documentary on YouTube you can watch, Demographic Winter, about the human extinction. When you watch it, you will see how much they manipulate data. But in between all of the facts that they're throwing at us, you can catch their gaps, you can catch their flaws. Because when they say our population, it's shrinking and it's aging, they're talking about Northern and Western hemispheres. And when you watch Demographic Winter, almost every expert talking on the documentary is white. So let's take a look at 3 examples of how they manipulate data. Cohabitation and serial marriage. I talked a lot about the consequences that they've talked about, like they claim it's going to lead to more drinking and driving, shorter lifespans, greater risk of domestic violence, so on. So they're throwing out all this flawed data. Second of all, transgenderism. So when I was at the World Congress of Families, I attended a workshop called The Fraud of Transgenderism. And what they talked about was cross-sex hormones. And they said that when male brains are exposed to estrogen, they're going to shrink 10 times faster than the normal shrinking of brains that happens with aging. But when women's brains are exposed to male hormones like testosterone, they grow excessively larger. Okay, so you can see how they are plumping up all this data to create their own storyline. So that's one example. And then the other example I want to share is about abortion and breast cancer. They cite a lot of studies that link abortion to breast cancer. In fact, they mentioned a Chinese study that said one abortion will increase your risk of breast cancer by 44%. So I haven't heard that story. But what they've also said is that premature termination of pregnancy increases your risk of breast cancer. Well, at this workshop, this other American woman came up to me afterward and she said, premature termination of pregnancy is going to increase breast cancer? She said, I've had 3 miscarriages. Am I going to get breast cancer? So you can see how they pull out and twist the information and the facts. All right. We're going to do another exercise, and I used Google Translate for this, so I'm going to read it in English so that Tanya can translate it. So I want to make sure that we get the right translation. I would like you to share your reactions to this paragraph in the chat. I'm going to read it now. The result of massive immigration in Germany, as well as in virtually all rich countries, is that immigrant cultures are projected to become the majority by 2050. Consider how the composition of society would change in the United States over time. By 2050, the vast majority of the United States population will be Hispanic. Already, half of the city council in Brussels is composed of recent immigrants or their children. The immigrant population of cities like Rotterdam is 40%, and the most common boy's name in Amsterdam is Mohammed. Europe's native populations are actually disappearing at astonishing rates. The US has a long tradition of successful immigration, and so the transition is expected to go well. All right, so let's talk about our reactions to this paragraph. Did we get some reactions in the chat? Not yet? Okay, let me give people a few seconds to kind of digest that and put the reactions in the chat. All right, I'll give you a few more seconds if you want to share your reaction, and otherwise we will go to the next slide to discuss this. Okay. So I put this in English, but I hope you can kind of follow along. This is, to me, the strategy of the opposition is to use smoke and mirrors. And the reason why I wanted to use this was because I have found that when I am writing this report on the backlash to the Istanbul Convention and I read information written by the opposition, it's really hard to pin them down. They use a lot of smoke and mirrors. They use a lot of fog. And it's very tricky because they'll say one thing, but they won't quite say what they're really saying. We're racist. And they will snake their way around it. And I think that this does a good job of showing how they do that. When you look at this, I put in red the red flags, the things that suggest we're racist. Immigrant cultures are going to become the majority. Society is going to change. The majority is going to be Hispanic. Brussels Council is comprised of immigrants. The most common boy's name in Amsterdam is Mohammed. So they're saying a bunch of racist things, but then they throw in this really soft sentence at the end that, oh, but the US has been okay with immigration and it's gonna go all right. So it's almost like this cover at the very end to say, we're not racist, but really they are. It's very sneaky, and they do this a lot. It's been very hard to pin them down on what they're saying because they snake their way through these kinds of arguments. So my point with this kind of slide is to say, watch for this. Refocus on the actual argument they are saying. The opposition here is talking about the percent of races, but it does not actually say why a demographic change in races is bad. So if you can refocus on forcing them to explain if and why demographic change is bad, they're probably going to have to deflect and go a different course. What they'll probably start talking about is protecting national values and identity. So you'll have to be prepared to show how immigrants contribute to the nation's economy, why diversity is a good thing. So my point is that when you can see the long view of what they are doing, you can more directly target their arguments, which they tend to hide behind a lot of smoke and mirrors. All right. So this is more, and I know some of you have seen this from the last Feminist Intensive, but I like this video because it does a good job of showing what the opposition does well. I'm going to try to play this on YouTube, and I know Tanya has a script. So let's watch this 1-minute video. Let's see if it goes. Hang on one second. I seem to be having some difficulties with getting it to play. Here we go. Can you all see this video? Is it on the right screen or not? It is on the right screen? Do you see it? No, you don't. Okay, let me put it on the screen. Now, can you see it? It's here? Okay. Let's try this.
Human rights. You may think you've always had yours, but you would be wrong. How did you get your human rights? Magical birth canal, of course. Disclaimer. Birth canal is not the size of an actual birth canal. Just saying, before the baby or fetus is born, it is not a human being. Clearly. But as it passes through the birth canal, something amazing happens that transforms it into a person. The human rights. Observe. Not a person, not a person, not a person. Coming out the other end, a person! Human rights! Congratulations. You now have value. Can't say the same for this one. So what exactly happens in the birth canal that causes this magical transformation? No one knows. But popular scientific theories include fairies, aliens, or of course, a mini Big Bang. I think it's fairies. No human rights? Human rights. No human rights? Human rights. Makes sense. Thanks, magical birth canal. Science, logic, magic, human rights.
What if it's a C-section?
Okay. Great. So let me get my screen back up. So you were all able to see the video, right? Yes? Okay. So there's 3 points I want to make with this slide. First of all, they use human rights language. Remember, I talked about that. And they are going to be using their own interpretations of human rights standards. Now, they will support some traditionally left-wing issues like pension, which gives them some credibility. But you can see that when they're talking about this magical birth canal, as babies pass through this magical canal, something amazing happens that transforms them into a person with human rights. Second, their messaging is very simple, it's very easy to understand, and it appeals to emotions. So the general public can understand their messaging. They use a lot of stories to make their point. And third, look at who they are targeting. They are targeting young, millennial, very pretty, perky people. And we have heard reports from many of our partners that the opposition is coming into schools to target the younger generation and talk about their values. There are church camps also being run for younger people to indoctrinate them in this idea. So that's the second one. Let's look at one more example, if I can get this one to play. Let's see if this is going to go. Maybe not. Hang on one second. I think we're going to have a little bit of a problem with this. So let's keep going. But this is a second video put up by the same organization. And what they're doing is it's about white men being able to talk about abortion, because they realize that when they're talking about abortion, the people who are speaking the most are white men who don't have uteruses. So they created this video to justify men's voices in reproductive rights. And second, they're using human rights language again in this. They talk about, oh, Jonathan, you're a man, but are you a slave owner? Were you a slave? Did you have anything to do with slavery? Well, then I guess if you didn't, you have no right to oppose slavery. And so you can see that they're creating these fantastic analogies in order to give men a voice in the pro-life movement. And again, in this video, they're targeting young people with pink hair and rock and roll music. I just want to check. I think there was something in the chat I saw. Did I miss that?
Yeah, Helena Fetkovich posted a while ago. She just wanted to add about manipulations in Ukraine. One of the most common manipulation by men about how they're discriminated against by the courts. So basically courts are always leaving their children with mothers and discriminating against fathers. But in reality, if you look at the court rulings, then children live with their mothers because fathers don't really even want it. And their fathers going to court 30% less. And also, if you look at the percentage of how court rules, it's pretty much the same for women and men. So there is really no discrimination.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Helena. It's important to see how it plays out in the courtrooms on the domestic levels. Great. All right, so let's talk about the international positioning strategy the opposition uses. They work to infiltrate international bodies so that they can tap into networks, they can influence international standards, and they can even get the benefit of potential funding from these bodies. So many of these groups from the opposition actually have special consultative status at the UN, the World Congress of Families, United Families International, Ordo Juris, Alliance for Defending Freedom. They all do. What they realized it was more efficient for them to influence the norms on the international forums like the United Nations and the EU than at every individual country level. So be aware that when you go to the UN to do human rights advocacy, they are there too, working to influence international standards. Another tactic they use is lawfare. We've seen this play out in a few ways with referenda, law and policies, constitutional challenges, and other lawsuits. So with referenda, we have seen numerous referenda to change constitutions to make marriage between a man and a woman in their constitution. We've seen a lot of laws get proposed. Governments are adopting laws and policies that make conditions for civil society really, really difficult. They target freedom of assembly and association. Look at Russia's foreign agent law. It places huge burdens on human rights organizations that take away from their real work, or in the worst cases, even closes them. This leads to copycat laws. We have seen Hungary adopt a similar law, although fortunately the European Court of Justice ruled against Hungary on that law. I know we have some people from Azerbaijan on here where there have been restrictions on independent lawyers and forcing them to recertify through their exams again. We've also seen governments adopt laws that roll back human rights. We've seen Russia decriminalize domestic violence. Poland tried to amend its domestic violence law to require 2 acts of violence, which did not pass. And of course, we've seen the opposition push the government to adopt laws that have their own agenda. In Ukraine, our partners shared with us about the proposed hate crimes law that would include family within the scope of its protection. And we know how important the family is to the opposition. We've also seen constitutional challenges. We've seen this play out in Bulgaria with the Istanbul Convention. And be aware there is an increasing tactic to start legal actions against anyone who criticizes the opposition views. Citizen Go is using this a lot in Spain. And the problem is for us is that human rights organizations do not have the money or the resources for these long and expensive lawsuits. The other strategy they proposed is an alternative to the Istanbul Convention. Now, some of you may have already heard about this. I just want to describe it briefly. And if you have other thoughts you want to share about the draft Convention on the Rights of the Family, please go ahead and put it into chat. This was created by Ordo Juris in Poland. And many of the challenges to the Istanbul Convention have been on constitutional grounds, as we know. So when you look at this draft convention, the very first thing it does is to say, this draft convention was created taking into account the constitutions of 33 countries. And it actually lists 33 different countries and their constitutions, and they're all geographically diverse from every continent. So I want to point out a few highlights from this treaty. First of all, it of course defines marriage as the permanent union of a man and woman. It says the child is subjected to legal protection before and after birth. It also talks about sexual violence. And this is interesting because this treaty says sexual violence poses a significant threat to marriage and family. So notice how sexual violence is not framed as violence against women or a human rights violation, but as something harmful to the family. And it also talks about parental freedom. It includes the right for parents to educate their child in line with their own religion and moral convictions. Now, interestingly, as you page through this convention, you are going to see that when it gets to the section on domestic violence, it actually cites to and refers back to the Istanbul Convention. So there's a strategy on this. And I think that the reason why this draft convention is citing back to the Istanbul Convention and using some of its provisions is because what they're saying is, hey, everything the Istanbul Convention covers, we cover, but in the context of family rights. We are going to adequately deal with all of the things the Istanbul Convention worries about, but hey, we're going to do it in a better way because we're doing it in the family. And we're legitimate, and we cite to a bunch of different things like this treaty, but it's only when you look closely at this draft convention that you see it's completely garbage. So I know that I'm happy to circulate it, but I think that our partners also have it, that as well. All right. So when I talk about the opposition, some of our partners in countries that are not yet effective have asked me, what are the red flags we should be looking out for in case the opposition comes to our country? So I've put up a list here that I'm going to read out loud, but I invite all of you to put in the chat other red flags you think are indicators that the opposition is present or that the opposition is coming into the country. What are the things that send warning signals that the opposition is growing? So I'll read these so that you know what they're saying in English. First of all, there's talk of family. You're going to hear lots of talk about the family. We've discussed that. You may see constitutional referenda to define marriage again. You'll see increasing talk and efforts to restrict abortion. There will be a backlash against the term gender. I know this is tricky because it's not always a word in the language, but you'll see some talk about gender versus sex. There's going to be a lot of activities and talk that's against LGBTI. Then you know the opposition is growing. Anything that has to do with birth rate decline discussions. Our population is decreasing. The immigrants are taking over. Any sort of sensationalist talk. I've shared a lot of examples with you about the boys in dresses, the men in bathrooms, that kind of thing. Religious voices will be growing. And I will add here, I know that in some issues, religious groups can be an ally. They are for us in the United States when it comes to immigrants and the death penalty. But if you start to hear conservative religious voices going up, that's a red flag. And you'll see increasing lack of cooperation with civil society, efforts by governments or other powerful bodies to shut out NGO participation and consultation. So those are some of the red flags. I don't see anything in the chat yet. So let's keep moving along. Oh, something came up. Turn it over to Elena.
On October 23rd this year, 2020, so the organization Ordio IURIS, I might need some help translating this, yeah. So they were agitating for the Convention for the Family Rights during the Ukrainian Parliament hearing.
So Ordo, thank you, Marta. So Ordo Juris is a Polish organization, but they are working now on domestic levels, I'm hearing, to push their convention forward on country by country levels. So watch out for this. That's another good one. A talk about the draft convention is another red flag. So let's talk about civil society needs. Our partner NGOs have indicated many different kinds of needs, resources, new alliances that cross over to different sectors. But like I said, and like our partners have said, the biggest need has been messaging. So I'm now going to turn to talking about strengthening messaging, because I think it's important that whenever we talk about the opposition, that we also talk about tools to counter them. So we have something in our toolbox. All right, I am going to try once again with my limited technological ability to play this. Okay, I think this is going to work. We'll see. Uh-oh, it's going without me. Sorry, the wrong one is playing. Let me move it over here. I have to say, I know how my parents feel now when they are faced with technology, because that's how I feel now. All right, this is called the girl effect. What I would like you to do is to answer the question in the chat. The question is, what is so powerful about this video? What did you like about this video? So let's play it. I think you can all see it, right? Okay, hang on. People cannot see the video. Let me move it over to my other screen. Can you see it now?
Для того, чтобы видео включить, надо, когда вы делитесь экраном, нажимаете «Поделить экран», Таня.
So when you share the screen,
и когда выбираете экран, нужно поставить галочку «Оптимизировать для видео».
When you choose the screen, no, when you share the screen, Rosalyn, can you hear me? Rosalyn, can you hear me? Rosalyn.
Надо оптимизировать просто для видео.
Yes, you need to optimize it for video.
Come into the 21st century with my technology. All right, let's try this one more time. Great. Okay. Great. I'm glad people could see the video. So, oh, hang on 1 second now. Sorry, guys. Thoughts? Anybody want to share what they liked about this video? You can either say it or throw it into the chat. Okay, I see. Good, they're all coming in and they're in English. Respect. It's a great cartoon. It's very impressive. It's to the girls. These are all great observations. It's also very simple and easy to understand, right? It was really easy to follow. Let's see, I know Olga added something, Elena.
Yes, it seems like 12-year-old girls can save the world.
It's empowering. It really was. It's very actual, Antonia says. It does convey the problem. You saw what happens to a 12-year-old girl who marries too soon. It also appealed to your emotions, didn't it? It kind of like made your heart swell at certain points in there. And it's positive. It ended so positive and uplifting. It showed the solution. That's important. It really showed how do we fix this problem that we just told you about. What they also did that was strategic was they put it on YouTube. So it has worldwide reach and anyone can see it. The one thing I would say they could maybe do differently is to put in the call for action. What do they want the viewer to do? Give them an action to carry out. They put their website in there, which was great, but it's important also to say, write to your parliament, you know, do this, donate to this cause. So that's one thing, but it's, I think it's a good example of this kind of messaging. So let's go back to sharing screen. All right. And let's talk about messaging. We've got about 25 minutes left. And I want to share with you, let me get back into my, hang on 1 second. Elena, which screen are you seeing? Can you tell me? Elena, are you seeing the girl effect one or are you seeing something different? You guys are seeing the right screen, right? And now you're seeing this, right? Hang on 1 second. It's the main slide. All right. Overview of the backlash. All right, I think you guys can see this now. Screen sharing is paused. Sorry, you guys, this is me being really technologically. All right, I think we're on the right screen now. So let's talk about effective messaging. If you have good prepared messaging, that is going to help you counter these myths, the sensational hysteria, all of the fear tactics the opposition is putting out. So it's helpful to think about it in 4 components. First, who is your target audience? People's hearts and minds will be moved differently depending on who they are. Second, what is your message? We're going to talk more about what makes for a powerful message to make people want to support you, to make people want to support women's rights or LGBTI rights. Third, think about the medium. What vehicle are you going to use to send out your message? And fourth, Who's your messenger? Who is the best person or people to carry forth your message? So we're going to do a short exercise to break things up, and I want you to put your thoughts in the chat. Okay, I'm going to read a sentence, and you will answer whether you think the audience is a finance minister, a business owner, general public, or the media. And you can put your answers in the chat. So here's the first sentence. Who do you think is the audience for this? In our country, one study found that for each euro invested in shelter services, that returned up to 19 euros in value. I'll read it one more time. In our country, our study found that for each euro invested in shelter services, that returned up to 19 euros in value. Is that audience for that sentence finance minister, business owner, general public, or media? Great. Okay. Answer finance minister, because you want to move the hearts and minds of the finance minister is going to be moved by money. So that's why you want to target your message that way. Second, 1 in 3 women will be a victim of violence. In your 20-unit apartment building where you live, that means 6 women have been, will be, or are being abused. Who is your target audience? Finance minister, business owner, general public, or media? I'll read it one more time. 1 in 3 women will be a victim of violence. In your 20-unit apartment building where you live, that means 6 women have been, will be, or are being abused. It looks like most people are answering public. Yes, it's public because you bring the issue close to them and you make the problem touch them. It affects you too. It's your neighbor. Great job. All right, the third one. Being employed is a key pathway to leaving a violent relationship. The financial security of a job allows women to escape an abusive relationship and still keep their home and standard of living for themselves and their kids. Finance minister, business owner, general public, or media? I'll read it one more time. Being employed is a key pathway to escaping abuse, and the financial security of a job allows women to escape abuse and still keep their home and standard of living for themselves and their kids. Great. And I see a lot going to business owners. Yeah, so you want to also talk to the business owners who are probably these women's employers. The final one. Sonia was abused by her husband for 20 years. He broke her arm, beat her with a hammer, and tried to stab her. Eventually, she sought help from the women's NGO to get an order for protection. Sonia and her children have now been safe for 3 years. Who is the audience for that? And I see an answer come through media. Yep, I'd say media or the general public. The media loves stories. So the more that you can show a story, the more the media will glom onto that. All right, great job, everyone. Let's talk about the ingredients for strong messaging. It's very simple. Keep it simple, use stories, and make your message proactive and positive. So using stories over statistics is a very good strategy. And I want to share an example of this. And some of you have heard me use this example before. Stories are more powerful messages than data because people are going to remember the story. Now, we should use both. Statistics are important, but stories are what people will tend to remember. So which story is more powerful? If a little boy at the shelter who uses the milk machine 5 or 6, even 7 times every day. He drinks milk all day long. But then we later found out it's because his dad put a lock on the freezer, the fridge, and the cupboards, so he could tell them when to eat or drink. These are the people who we serve. So which story was more powerful? The story of David, right? You're going to remember that. Now, you can use statistics to make your point, and I do illustrate them. But again, people tend to be moved and remember stories. We also want our messaging to be more proactive and more positive rather than defensive. One of the biggest issues that's come out from our partners is that we are too reactive to the opposition. We are there doing self-defense against every message they are throwing out there. So we need to take the extra step and be proactive and positive about this. So here's an example that I want to show from the United States. This is a campaign that was started in November 4 years ago after Trump was elected in our country. The goal of this campaign was to support an inclusive, nonpartisan, and a positive environment for everyone in Minnesota and the US. So these are yard signs. So what that means is you buy them and you put them in your front yard, or you put them in your window if you live in an apartment so everyone can see them. So why this is so effective is because, first of all, it's got high visibility. It stands out on people's lawns and windows. In my neighborhood, I see at least 5 of them when I go drive by, and then I know, hey, this is a very friendly neighborhood. A lot of people support this. And look at the colors. The colors really attract children's attention. So what that does is it sparks conversation for the child, and the child will ask, what does the sign mean? So that's great to attract that kind of attention. Second, it is permanent. It's not just a Facebook post or a tweet on Twitter that will disappear after one day. These signs have been up for 4 years. We've also translated them into 9 languages, which I'll show you in a second. And look at the message. All are welcome here. It's very inclusive. And when you go to this website, the biggest symbol you see is a heart. Now, the proceeds from this go to nonprofits, and there's links to the website and social media. So it's really effective in that way. And here you can see it posted in all the different languages, which reinforces the message that everybody is indeed welcome here. We also want to go for simplicity and personal messaging over jargon and abstract. When we use legal words, when we use elite words that the general public does not understand, it's really not going to move hearts and minds. So go for simple and personal. Let's take a look at this. This is from the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States. This was a multi-year campaign to build power and to intervene when our government was using violence against Black communities. As you probably all know, you probably saw the news from the summer after the murder of George Floyd, which happened in our city here in Minneapolis. We have had a lot of shootings of Black men and boys. So this movement was started in response. Look at the message, Black Lives Matter. It's very simple, it's personal. It's about human lives. And it says what it needs to say very shortly and succinctly. At a time when Black people are getting killed, Black lives matter. Black lives are important. Now, many people see the hashtag that came out of this, hashtag Black Lives Matter, as the very first US social movement to use the internet to mobilize the masses. And in fact, some people think that hashtag Me Too would not have been as successful if it wasn't for the Black Lives Matter movement doing this first. In fact, when you look at this hashtag, it has been tweeted 47.8 million times. So this is another example. This example combines all of the ingredients. It is simple, it uses stories, it is proactive, and it is positive. So the consensus from the opposition and from our side, our civil society, is that we need simple, clear messaging that the general public can understand, less jargon. We have to be more proactive. So this is an example of the Minnesota, where we live, same-sex marriage campaign. Look at how we do not use language. There's no language about equality or equal rights. It's about love. Love is love. So very quickly about Minnesota history, I want to explain what happened as part of this messaging. Like many other countries, Romania and Armenia, to name a few, we had a voter referendum to amend our Constitution to ban same-sex marriage. So in that referendum, our message was vote no on the amendment. So we defeated that, and I'll describe more about how. But second, that campaign was so successful that we actually launched from that to legalize same-sex marriage 1 year later. So there were 2 consecutive campaigns in Minnesota. The first was vote no on the constitutional referendum, and the second was to legalize same-sex marriage. So I'm just explaining it to avoid confusion. So let's take a closer look at this campaign, because I know that we're all facing a lot of anti-LGBTI and gender ideology messages. The overall message was simple, which you see in the center. Love will prevail. The focus was on the loving commitment that is the basis for all families, gay and straight. So what were the 4 main factors that made this messaging campaign to legalize same-sex marriage so successful? First, it took time and resources. It took 18 months to organize it, and they had to raise $12 million. So we can't do this without time and resources, and it's important that funders understand we need that. Second, their allies were very, very diverse. They were nonpartisan, so there were people from all political parties, NGOs, business leaders, and faith-based religious groups. The movement purposely avoided confrontation. They would not use blunt words like bigotry or discrimination. Now, I know that religious groups are an issue here for many people. And I'm going to say that Catholics and evangelicals were not an ally for us in this campaign. In fact, our Catholic Archbishop went on TV and he said it wasn't about discrimination. It was just that the Catholic Church wanted to affirm marriage's traditional definition. Then they went and they sent a DVD to all of their parishioners advocating for them to oppose same-sex marriage. But here's the thing. Our side, our movement, refused to give up the religious grounds. So they actively recruited help from other faith communities. They went to other religions that they knew would support this. And we were very clear that our law was going to address civil marriage, not religious marriage. Third, they were really strategic about messengers, who they used to talk about same-sex marriage. They used heterosexual couples, and I'll talk about them next. And fourth, finally, they moved from the abstract to the personal, and they used conversation from the heart. This was their secret weapon in this, a huge one-on-one conversation drive. So what the campaign did was they organized training sessions for conversation volunteers in their churches and campaign offices. Then those volunteers would go talk with people in their lives about voting no on the amendment. And they taught them the right language to use. The campaign knew that we've always been focused on rights and equality and discrimination, but that language does not move voters. So they had to have conversations from the heart. So taking it from this abstract frame of mind of equality and equal rights and moving it into the personal and reminding people that this is going to hurt real people was effective. So the beauty of this strategy was that it wasn't a Minnesotan talking to a Minnesotan. It was a Catholic talking to a Catholic, a Jewish person talking to a Jewish person. And so giving people a chance to compare their fears or their misbeliefs with the actual lived experience of the affected population really worked. This is a commercial used for the Vote No campaign. This is who they used as their messengers. This couple, they're heterosexual, they're white, they're Catholic, they've been married for 13 years and they have 3 kids. They're members of our conservative political party. And they did an ad for us, I mean, not for us, they did an ad to vote no on the referendum. Why? Because they were friends with their lesbian neighbors, and this convinced them to support the campaign. So having messengers like this who are diverse and not necessarily from our side is powerful in our movement against the opposition. So here's some examples from the campaign so you can see the graphics. Lots of hearts, very positive. And I want to make an important point about this because I think this goes straight to the heart of the opposition's tactic. Look at how they've put the focus on protecting the family. Some of these signs, what they say is, in Minnesota, we don't turn our backs on family. And I love this example because the opposition is using family protection and save the family as their strongest argument. But keep in mind, the family is not just a strategy for the opposition. As this campaign shows, we can use the very same argument about the family. We can take back the family and we can say, no, in our country, we do not turn our backs on family. So what I want to show, and I'm going to try this again with my limited technological capabilities, is one example of how you can use the opposition's tactics against them. And I showed this at the Feminist Intensive. But the opposition, they're going to use family. So let's take back the family. Let's redefine the family and show the public what family is. Family is about love. Family is real. Family is about human beings just like you and me. All right. So I am going to try to stop sharing. I am going to try to, let's see if I can actually get this to go. Okay. Hang on one second. I will share my screen. Okay. So what I would like you to do in the last few minutes we have remaining is this profiles 3 same-sex families. We are only going to have time to watch 1 or 2 of them, but I'd like you to put in the chat what moved you about each story. What did you like about each story and what did they do effectively? So let's go ahead and watch this and let me know if you have problems seeing it.
There's a lot of diversity in Minnesota. Growing up, I always had the sense that we are a place where we value each other's differences. I've always felt like this is my home, I belong here. I am a Minnesotan, and I always will be. My name is Justine Nelson. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota, and Teresa is the love of my life. We wake up at 6, and it is full speed ahead. We brush our teeth, get dressed. Teresa's running around like crazy, getting the backpacks ready, getting lunches ready. She's the rock in the household. She's the one who makes sure everything happens. Thank you. Just have a nice day. Margaret is our extrovert. She is a chatty thing. She loves art. She loves sports. She loves everything. And she seems to have a knack for most of it. Rosie is very different. She just started to talk, just boom, just chat, chat, chat about everything. She loves cooking. She loves gardening. And I feel like she's coming into her own. Teresa is the love of my life. She is always there for me. She's the most handsome woman I've ever seen, and she takes my breath away after 10 years of being together. When I meet people for the first time, there's no word I can use to describe to them who she is. I'm hoping that people will vote no, and I'm asking them to vote no so that someday in the future, I'll be able to introduce her as, this is my wife, Teresa. That feels right.
I'm Michael.
Okay. So we've got limited time, so let's come back together as a group. Anybody want to share what they really liked about that video showing a same-sex couple? I'll share a few of my reactions in the interest of time, but you can put them into chat. It's really clear that right away, the relationship is based on love. And we talked about the importance of love. And she wants to introduce her partner as her wife, which seems like a pretty fair wish, especially considering that every married straight partner can do that. It's really typical family, isn't it? I mean, kids, chaos, hobbies, getting ready for school, messes, it makes you relate to them. And I think this is really effective because it just shows that this is clearly a loving family who just wants to be recognized as that by the law. So you can see that there are ways to take back the messaging and take back the family. And I hope that you'll remember that we can apply this to everything the opposition is doing, whether they're talking about immigrants, nationalism, gender ideology, any of those things we highlighted today. There are ways to take back and redefine those issues in our own way that will reach the public. So we're coming upon the last few minutes. The last summary, I would say, in 3 points from my training, and I'll open it up for any questions in the last minute, is first of all, know the opposition's tactics. We know what issues they're targeting, so know and understand what strategies they're doing and what arguments, what lies, basically, they're using. Second, be ready to counter those with your own facts, your own evidence and research. And third and finally, do it in a way that the public, the average person walking down the street, can understand. So use that simple messaging we had talked about so that you can reach people and move hearts and minds. So I want to thank you. And if there's any questions, I am available. A huge thank you to our partners in Ukraine, to all of you for attending. You were wonderful. And I'm available offline as well if you want to email me with any questions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tanya and Elena, as well, for your translation and interpretation.
Rosalyn, it's just big wow from my side. Really admired, you know, your capacity to overview within such a short period of time, such a big range of issues, really very actual and through very obvious bright examples, videos, like all the visual aids were put together. Really, thank you so much for all these efforts. I think that this video is worth distributing over and over again so that our young feminists, but also, you know, very experienced ones, I think that it will be very interesting for everyone to watch this video and to listen to this session again. Thank you very much. So I wonder if there are any questions remaining. I know that our time is over, but I just wonder if there are any final moments. I'm just, no. If not, then I would like just to thank you one more time for this wonderful session, as well as thank you, send my biggest thanks to everyone, to each of our partners, to Marta and to Zhensky Initiative with the Women's Initiative Center for doing this project in coordination with other 6 partners or with other partners from the remaining 5 countries. So it was really very important, I think, to put together this ocean of knowledge altogether. Thank you. And we will be having the next session tomorrow, again starts at 10:30 Ukrainian time. And I will probably just start, say these last words in Russian, since the biggest part of our audience is in Russian. This is just the announcement of tomorrow's sessions. Дорогие зрители, дорогие участники.
Dear viewers, dear participants, one more time, thank you very much for your time, for your participation. I would like to thank our expert, Rosalyn Park, once again for a very interesting session, very comprehensive. I think that it was indeed a very good format. And it was rather pleasant to observe the thoughts and also see the moments that are common for our countries, but also some specific US moments. And I would like to once again announce that tomorrow we have 2 sessions. They switched places. So we're going to have the session of our Georgian colleagues and then our Armenian colleagues. The time remains the same, Ukrainian time, 10:30 for the first session and 14:30 for the second session. Thank you for your attention. Have a good day. If there are any last comments from our coordinator, Marta, please. Yes, I would like to say thank you very much to Shahla for having moderated the entire day. And thank you very much, Rosalyn. Rosalyn has been our partner for many years, and we've been doing a lot together in terms of reports to the UN structures. And we also have different common initiatives. Not always we find the financial resources for them, but I would like to say that Rosalyn is a partner who is very reliable and always finds the opportunity to come to see us at the FEM Intensive or to have the session with us that we require or just discuss the problems that we observe in Ukraine. And we value very much the fact that we have such a partner, and we're always happy to meet offline and now, unfortunately, online. I hope that in the nearest time, Rosalyn will be able to come again to see us in Ukraine. Welcome. Thank you, Marta. A lot of